I decided to bring back about 10 colleagues for an after-party, so I asked my husband to get things ready. Despite being in my final month of pregnancy, I believed there was still much I could do. However, exhausted from taking care of 2-year-old twins and being heavily pregnant, my body was at its limit. My husband, indifferent to child care and firm in his belief that it was a woman's job, lost his temper when I understandably refused to handle the last-minute preparations for the after-party. Despite my exhaustion, I reluctantly began preparing, laying down in the nursery to put the twins to sleep. 5 hours later, one of the drunk colleagues stumbled into the nursery and was shocked to discover I had young kids and a pregnant wife. He accused my husband of tricking them, raising his fist in anger. With just one remark from my husband, the enjoyable after-party turned into chaos. I had married my husband at 28 in a whirlwind romance, and we had married within a few months. While I couldn't quit my job immediately, we agreed that I would hand over my duties and resign upon becoming pregnant. My husband always wanted me to be a homemaker, and though we didn't actively try for kids, we enjoyed a typical newlywed life for the first year. I became pregnant just before turning 30, and true to our agreement, I left my job to become a full-time homemaker. My husband was excited about becoming a father of 2, but he struggled with household responsibilities. During my hospital stay for the twins' birth, my in-laws suggested he stay with them, but he chose to stay at his parents' house. Upon returning home, my husband's disinterest in parenting became apparent. He complained, left me with the babies and the luggage, and demanded tea. This marked the beginning of a pattern where he showed little interest in parenting, even with both sets of grandparents helping out. Parenting eventually became a joint effort with both sets of grandparents who adored the twins. Despite their reassurances and support, my husband showed no interest in getting involved in childcare. His attitude worsened when my parents were not around, leading to my in-laws losing their patience. Despite stories of other fathers overcoming initial hesitations, my husband remained uninterested, responding with indifference or monosyllabic answers. His attitude deteriorated further in the absence of my parents, complaining about hunger and demanding proper meals. While I breastfed the twins, my husband criticized the use of ready meals, insisting on a home-cooked meal as a homemaker's duty. Despite my assurance that I didn't rely on ready meals all the time, he seemed dissatisfied even with just one item being store-bought. He viewed the use of ready meals as slacking off in housework, asserting that if he was hungry, he could make something himself. I suggested taking turns breastfeeding with formula milk instead of demanding a cooked meal, which initially shocked my husband. My in-laws scolded him, explaining that if I cook, there would be nothing left for a full-time homemaker to do. And if I breastfeed, what's left for a mother to do? Their lectures were followed by basic child care lessons from my father-in-law. Although my husband reluctantly helped, he remained sullen for the next 2 years until I became pregnant with our third child. During my second pregnancy, my severe morning sickness couldn't elicit any demands from my husband. He started doing more household chores and child care, thanks in part to my in-laws' initial guidance. However, he gradually found excuses to avoid these responsibilities. The turning point was when he cooked a meal that wasn't very tasty. Feeling unappreciated, he thought it was a waste of time, and his dedication quickly faded. Now he spends his weekends on hobbies, often coming home late on weekdays due to work or social engagements. Despite my requests for him to come home earlier or spend at least one weekend day with the twins, he prioritizes his personal interests. This situation, combined with his disinterest in parenting, left me questioning why I got pregnant with a third child. As the 2-year-old twins became more sensitive to our attitudes, I couldn't help but feel disappointed. Despite occasional kindness from my husband, especially in seeking physical intimacy, our overall dynamic was strained. Refusing him would create problems, creating a vicious cycle that led to our current situation. Feeling the baby move inside my growing belly was endearing, but I couldn't shake the relentless self-questioning. With the upcoming C-section, I needed my husband's help to care for the twins while I was hospitalized. However, he couldn't commit to evenings, citing unpredictable work and the embarrassment of taking time off for his wife's childbirth. His demand for dinner and dismissal of the topic left me speechless. As my pregnancy progressed, the strain on my back increased, and his criticism of my housework intensified. His logic, asserting that his earnings kept the family going, was infuriating. Approaching the 36th week of pregnancy, my movements slowed, and his lack of consideration added to my frustration. Yet, fearing harm to my body, I hesitated to confront him. I refrained from engaging in an argument, keeping my urge to argue in check as I absorbed unkind words from my husband. The 38th week of my pregnancy, scheduled for a C-section, was quickly approaching. My husband questioned the need for a C-section this time since it was just one baby, suggesting that natural childbirth might be more fulfilling. However, he failed to understand the risks involved and dismissed the idea of early hospitalization and a longer stay. His misconception that I was choosing a C-section to avoid housework left me bewildered. Despite patient explanations of the risks to both mother and baby, he refused to listen, deeming the topic irrelevant to him. On the day of my admission, I attempted to get his understanding, but he snapped at me, calling me persistent. Unexpectedly, my husband called to announce that he was bringing 10 colleagues home for an after-party and asked me to prepare food, including desserts for women. This used to be a common occurrence before the twins were born, but the frequency had decreased. I explained the impracticality of preparing a meal in my condition, especially with short notice. I suggested having the after-party elsewhere, even if it meant exceeding the budget, but my husband insisted on hosting it at our house. Feeling drained, I succumbed to his demands, warning him that I could only make do with what we had. I managed to prepare a meal for 10 people using extra ingredients I had bought earlier. As I cooked, I felt my belly tensing up, and I wondered if I'd be able to go shopping again tomorrow. My husband instructed me to hide in the room with the twins and stay quiet once everything was ready. While putting the twins to bed, the pain in my belly became more intense. Worried, I tried to hold back a cry and stayed hidden. The pain escalated, and just then, a colleague drunkenly opened the door, mistaking the room for the bathroom. In the room were the sleeping twins and me, a pregnant woman barely holding back a groan of pain. I brushed off the colleague's intrusion, asking him to enjoy himself without worrying about us. However, from the living room, I overheard his angry voice questioning my husband's decision to leave me alone with the kids, especially considering my pregnancy. I had assumed they were being considerate, but this sudden change in their attitude left me puzzled. I wondered if they were joking around after a few drinks, and my husband took it seriously. I believed it had come to this point because once my husband had committed to hosting the after-party, he couldn't back down. Prioritizing appearances, he even got angry and demanded that I comply. However, from the conversation among his colleagues, it seemed that my husband had been persistently inviting a particular colleague who had been declining invitations due to small kids at home. The colleague felt guilty for attending so late at night to a house with kids and a pregnant woman. A colleague mentioned, "I was told you and the kids were at your parents' house and your husband was alone, so no need to worry." Believing that 10 colleagues came for an after-party, my husband had instructed me to hide so I wouldn't be seen. The colleague continued, "She always uses excuses like taking care of the twins or being pregnant and close to delivering to skip household chores. I had to make her cook, at least making a meal for 10 people at once. Considering how much she has been slacking, it's still not enough." My husband confidently supported this perspective, stating with confidence, "Cooking for 10 people at this hour. It's still not enough." Curious and worried, I left the room, fearing my enraged husband's reaction. I witnessed a colleague grabbing my husband by the shirt in the living room, even as the drunken colleagues tried to calm him down. Some colleagues, including those with children the same age as the twins, expressed disbelief and scorn toward my husband. Female colleagues labeled him the worst kind of husband, suggesting disbanding the gathering. Some colleagues started to tiddy up, and my husband, confronted as the worst husband and father, shrank from his previously arrogant demeanor. Several colleagues noticed me and apologized. Seeking relief, I moved to a nearby sofa. While on the sofa, I realized that the pain in my stomach was coming at regular intervals, indicating labor. Seeking help from my husband, who was being scolded, proved futile. A colleague noticed and asked if I needed to call the hospital. When I nodded, they handed me the phone. I managed to call the hospital, which instructed me to come right away. Attempting to get up to fetch my hospital bag, a female colleague offered to get it with my permission. At this hour, with my husband being useless, I wondered about calling my in-laws to take care of the twins. Instead, my husband suggested going alone and requested not to use the ambulance siren to avoid embarrassment. Blaming me for his self-inflicted problems, my husband argued that I should take responsibility for the situation. Suppressing my urge to speak out, I heard the sound of something being struck. Looking towards the noise, I saw one of my husband's colleagues slapping him across the face. The colleague expressed disbelief at my husband's actions, emphasizing that giving birth is a matter of life and death. My husband, still defiant, argued that he was not at fault and even threatened to sue for assault. However, none of his colleagues were listening anymore. As the commotion continued, the twins woke up, scared by the unfamiliar adults and raised voices, and began crying. I found myself overwhelmed, not only caring for myself, but also having to soothe the twins, which frankly frustrated me. In such a critical moment, a useless husband who prioritizes his pride becomes unnecessary. Just as I contemplated calling my in-laws for help, a female colleague and a colleague with children offered to take care of the twins. Gratefully, I accepted their offer. The woman mentioned her experience caring for nieces and nephews, while the man shared that his kids were about the same age as the twins. I informed them about the abundance of toys in the twins' room, no allergies to worry about for meals, and the freedom to use any available food. Additionally, I mentioned that my mother-in-law was expected in the morning, but I would contact her to come earlier. Some colleagues who had gone through childbirth suggested taking a taxi to the hospital, but it was taking too long. A colleague mentioned having a nearby subordinate who wasn't at the gathering, and he rushed over after being called. Ignoring my husband's insistence on his righteousness, the colleague's subordinate drove me to the hospital. The female colleague who accompanied me volunteered to stay until my in-laws or parents arrived. Expressing gratitude, she even contacted my parents and in-laws on my behalf. Despite having work the next day, she insisted it was fine and stayed with me until my in-laws arrived. My parents, living out of state, arrived the next morning, relieved to hear that both mother and child were safe. However, the real turmoil began once everything settled down. My in-laws and parents, upon learning that the woman who called them was my husband's colleague, suspected infidelity. They rushed to the hospital, and hearing the full story, realized the situation was more serious than an affair. Assuming my husband was at home taking care of the twins, my in-laws felt somewhat relieved. However, the reality was that colleagues were looking after the twins, and I had been forced to cook for 10 people while nearing childbirth. My in-laws apologized to me and my parents for my husband's misbehavior, suggesting it would be better if my parents were here. They left to deal with my husband. Upon arriving home, my in-laws found a scene that was apparently appalling. Most of my husband's colleagues had gone home, leaving only the 2 who had offered to look after the twins. They were busy caring for the twins and cleaning up after the gathering. My husband was sulking in a corner, drinking beer from a can. His father gave him a solid hit, and my mother-in-law thanked the remaining colleagues for their assistance. Later, my in-laws thanked the remaining 10 colleagues to express their gratitude and apology. When it was just my husband, his parents, and the twins, my mother-in-law took the twins out for a walk to shield them from their father getting scolded. Upon returning home, my husband's cheek was even more swollen, indicating a solid hit from his father. Despite the stern lecture, My husband insisted that what he did wasn't wrong. Upon my return home with our third child, my husband showed no change of heart in front of his parents, seemingly complying with their instructions. However, as soon as his parents left, he reverted to his old self. With 2-year-old twins and a newborn baby, I couldn't free up my hands, yet he continued ordering me around. He started blaming me for being an inadequate wife, claiming that was the reason his father hit him. Fed up, I decided to divorce him and informed my in-laws and parents about it. My parents supported the decision, and my in-laws, disappointed in their son, expressed no opposition, apologizing for the trouble he caused. Despite this, my husband strongly opposed the divorce, consulting his colleagues at work for advice, but they were surprised by his behavior. I hadn't sought a divorce earlier, and my decision was supported by my in-laws. Essentially, my husband found himself isolated by his colleagues, and rumors began circulating at his workplace about an incident during a home party he hosted. The source remained unclear, but on the following workday, a few, including my husband, were absent or arrived late. Furthermore, my in-laws visited the company to apologize to the colleagues present during the event, adding to the mystery. The speculation within the office intensified when news of my safe delivery reached the 10 colleagues who attended the party. Curious employees started speculating that perhaps my delivery played a role in my husband's alleged misstep. While not entirely accurate, the rumor spread, leading to my husband being looked down upon not just by colleagues but also subordinates. Eventually, his work shortcomings became conspicuous, and feeling uncomfortable, he chose to leave the job voluntarily. Only after quitting his job and returning to his parents' house did my husband seem to grasp the gravity of his actions. Initially agreeing to the divorce in a fit of anger, he later pleaded with me, almost in tears, to reconsider, emphasizing that our home was his sanctuary. By then, however, I had already let go of that house, returning to my parents' home, where I am now raising our children with their support. I have no time to spare for a man I've already given up on. Subsequently, my husband struggled to find employment before the deadline and was eventually kicked out of his parents' house with no money. Forced into a corner and facing child support and alimony payments, he resorted to borrowing money from precarious sources, leading him into a life hounded by debt collectors. Presently, he holds a challenging job under shady lenders, earning barely enough each day, with most of it immediately taken away for debt repayment. Despite being back at my parents' house, I maintain contact with my ex-husband's colleagues and his parents. The twins expressed a desire to reconnect with the big sister and big brother who played with them, prompting me to reach out. Surprisingly, aside from my husband, his colleagues turned out to be sensible and understanding individuals. I attribute my current happiness to these 10 people. And I've even formed strong connections with some of them on a family-to-family basis, where we share our parenting challenges. My in-laws have been incredibly supportive, and the twins adore them. Due to the positive relationship between my parents and in-laws, they regularly come to visit the twins and the new baby. This entire experience has taught me the importance of helping each other out, and I won't forget the gratitude I felt then. I aspire to create an even happier life than I have now with my precious family.